Great. Okay, lecture 20. We are just marching through. We are going to continue our discussion on economic and climate shocks and violence today, and in particular, spend a lot of time today talking about instrumental variables methods. And I think we may go slightly over into the next lecture, but we'll see how far we get through today. And then we have a bunch of other interesting topics on the way. Problem set 3 will be distributed this Thursday, and then due the following week, and that'll be the last assignment before the final. So we've gone through the UDRI paper, we had a guest lecture, talking about poverty and witch killing, and today we're going to talk about economic shocks and civil conflict. But before we go there, I want to mention that there's an event that's highly relevant to our current discussion on climate and climate shocks, which is being held by the Center for Effective Global Action, the center on campus that I'm the director of, called Promoting Global Development and Changing Climate. So very relevant to the discussions in this course. A lot of the papers and research projects being presented will be using methods you're going to be very familiar with in this course, and I'll actually be presenting some work on climate and violence there. So very related to what we're speaking of today. It's taking place 1 block away from campus on Durant, and very accessible. This is the sort of postcard the center put together, and it's a list of some of the folks presenting. So there's a bunch of Berkeley faculty, and Michael Greenstone from MIT, who's a prominent environmental economist, as well as Tom Steyer. So people are following sort of climate change policy in the U.S. You know who Tom Steyer is. We're really lucky he'll be speaking. Now, there's one issue, which is it's going on during the time of this lecture. So I'm going to ask you guys to attend. I can't require it, but I'll ask you to attend. It's a very big venue. It's very close to campus. It's on issues directly relevant to this course. So if you can register on the website here. Free registration. So that's a perk. And it'd be great to have you guys take part. A few years ago, we had our first Evidence Action Symposium, which actually focused on the policy impacts of dewarming. So that was something you guys have heard about in this course. And I know the students that attended the course that year did enjoy seeing some discussion of papers they'd seen in class and related methods applied. And what's unusual about these Evidence Action Symposiums as well is there are policymakers there too who are using the evidence. That's the whole goal of the symposium. And they're talking about how the kind of evidence they receive, the kind of evidence they want, how the research is shaping the debate in their country, etc. So I think it's actually going to be pretty exciting, and hopefully you guys can attend.
So it's like you don't have lecture, but
we won't have a lecture, but I will be lecturing during that time period there. And you can go whenever you want. But during class time, of course, would be the natural time to attend. And then some of you may want to attend the earlier part or the later part as well. But during class time, I would ask you guys to attend. And again, since it's 1 block off campus and sort of the same time, hopefully you guys can attend. And don't forget to bring your clickers. Because, no, come on. I'm not really going to do that too. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, great. So this is going to shift the schedule. So this is sort of the revised schedule. We'll be talking about economic shocks and instrumental variables today, getting to corruption culture, debates on foreign aid, trade, and development. And then in section that week, so in 2 weeks, there'll be a discussion of basically the one paper that's on the syllabus that we're not going to talk about because of the symposium. So that'll be covered in section. So the same material will be covered. And then the last week, those last 2 lectures will focus on what I call success stories and future challenges. We'll talk about the case of Botswana in particular for part of those lectures. Can we just pause for a second and see if there's any questions or comments? I will say for people that are really into the climate issue, and I know not all of you are, but if you are, SIGA is also going to be hosting a free showing of the film Chasing Ice. How many people have heard of this film? So it's nominated for Best Documentary Film this year, I guess. And that's going to be shown, I think, next Wednesday on campus. So if you are interested, just go to the SIGA website as well. I meant Tuesday, that's right. Thank you. Next Tuesday, thank you. Did you guys look it up that quickly, or did you already have it memorized? You already confirmed, perfect. Okay, so next Tuesday, my bad, thanks. Okay, so any questions before we dive in? Okay, so let's get back to civil war and development. We started on this last time. Let me quickly go through a few slides and then get to instrumental variables. What we started talking about at the end of the lecture last time was just the fact that civil war and civil conflict have been so widespread in sub-Saharan Africa, with 70% of countries having experienced at least a year of civil war, civil conflict since 1980. And at the peak years in the 1990s, in any given year, a third of African countries had an active conflict. So that's kind of mind-blowing, but it really suggests that conflict and war and violence are something central to the process of economic development that we can't ignore, and we have to sort of incorporate into our analysis. So this again was the map I showed you last time, where country sizes are just weighted by the number of battle deaths in one given year, the year 2002, and sub-Saharan Africa is totally disproportionate there. Okay, so what does the kind of broader picture look like? Since the 1990s, the proportion of African countries having active conflicts has fallen, and several very large, prominent, violent, particularly violent conflicts like the one in Sierra Leone have ended, as well as Angola, Liberia. But several other conflicts have started in the interim, and Africa's 2 largest countries in terms of area, Congo and Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo and Sudan, still have active conflicts, and Sudan has this complicated situation now with South Sudan that broke off from Sudan, further complicating the picture. As we briefly mentioned last time, now there's active conflict in Mali. There was just a coup 2 weeks ago in Central African Republic. There's been a recent coup in Guinea a couple years ago, etc. So despite the progress, there's still a lot of active conflict and a lot of political instability. So the question I want to ask is, how does this widespread conflict link up to economic performance? We've been mainly focusing on economic performance so far, but over the next few weeks of the course, we're going to have a bit of a shift towards institutions and political economy as we discuss corruption and the uses of foreign aid as well as violence here. How are these related? And where does climate fit into all of this, if at all? So that's what we're going to talk about today. And the follow-up question, once we hopefully have some understanding of the interrelationships between these different variables, is what could public policy do to reduce the risk of conflict and try to reduce the sorts of humanitarian implications and economic implications of violence. So what I want to start out with is a little bit of data and some patterns we see in the data linking these variables. So the first thing to note is if you look across countries, and all of you know this already, but seeing the data I think is quite striking, countries with higher per capita income have much less armed conflict. That is the most robust finding in the literature on civil war. Rich countries basically have no civil war. Poor countries have tons of civil war. So that's one pattern. The second pattern we see is countries that are experiencing faster economic growth in a given year are much less likely to have civil war or active conflict in that year. In other words, both in terms of income levels and in terms of income growth, violence, organized political violence in the form of armed conflict, and income are negatively correlated. If you're richer or growing faster, you tend to have less violence. So here's a plot that demonstrates this, and this comes from a survey article I wrote with Chris Blackman a few years ago. What we have on the x-axis here is GDP per capita ranked in percentiles. So if you're the US, and you're, say, the richest country, or one of the richest countries in the world in per capita terms, you're way up here at 1. if you're in the bottom percentile of countries, so you're Sierra Leone, remember I showed you the income plot in one of the early lectures, you're way down here. So the risk in any given year over the past few decades of having an armed conflict, if you're literally one of the poorest countries in the world, is somewhere up there between 0.2 and 0.3. And the risk if you're really rich is basically 0. You can not go all the way to the extremes, but rather talk about, say, the bottom quintile and the top quintile, and you get a few percent over here, 3 or 4%, and you get something closer to 20% over there. Yeah, Thomas. This is just fitting the data. You could think of it that way, but this is even more flexible. This is basically just fitting the a very high order polynomial to data, where the vertical axis here captures the share of years over this time period where the countries had active conflict. Basically, it's like quantile regression, but just think of this in a more descriptive way. We're just plotting the data basically here in the most non-parametric way possible. Any other patterns that are noticeable or interesting here? Is there any nonlinearity here? And what could sort of be behind that? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So it's not perfectly linear. It isn't like as you get richer, it's perfectly linear. What ends up happening with a lot of the middle-income countries, there's actually a fair number of, say, middle-income Latin American countries that have quite a bit of conflict. So that's part of what's going on here in the middle. And then you have mainly, European, North American, etc. countries all the way in the right tail. Was there a hand up in the back? Yeah. You're saying that the middle-income countries have more inequality? It's an interesting point that in the theoretical models, the economic models of conflict, the distribution of income can matter in driving conflict. So if you have a lot of very poor people and a lot of very rich people, then the poor people have a lot to fight for. And of course, to the extent that these middle-income countries here are, say, many of them are in Latin America countries do have very high inequality. So there's, that could be part of the mix. Yeah.
It seems like they're necessarily close economies either in terms of violence. The middle-income countries are going to be more prone to, like the U.S. or Europe having interests to actually be power because the richer are going to get more than the
Potentially. And there certainly was a lot of intervention, Cold War intervention in Latin America. Again, it's the sort of one of the core middle-income regions. Although there was a lot of intervention in Africa too. Okay. So this is a pattern in the data. The second pattern that I mentioned has to do with growth. And this is going to take us to regressions. And these regressions in a few minutes are going to take us to instrumental variable math. So imagine what we care about understanding is the causal relationship between economic growth in country I, year t, so our usual subscripts, how that affects the risk of war in a given year in that place. So imagine war is a function of your growth rate and some other variable. Here it's just a one variable x. Of course, it could be a vector. It could be many variables that are harder to understand. They may be harder to measure. Okay, so this formulation is very similar to the formulation we had before, where we're looking at the links between, say, education and health. And a number of factors beyond health could have driven education, like parent socioeconomic status we were talking about. Well, here, there could be these other factors. Can people think of what some of these factors might be? What else other than contemporaneous growth might affect the outbreak of war in a given society? You've already actually mentioned some of them in your comments before. But yeah. Yeah, so something that has to do with political institutions, maybe the degree of inequality. Social structures could matter. Maybe, for instance, you might have a hypothesis that conflict is less likely in democracy. That might be a hypothesis, because in democratic systems, groups with grievances may be much more able to express those grievances in the political process, therefore not needing to resort to armed conflict. At the same time, you might think the opposite. You might think that authoritarian dictatorships are really good at clamping down on dissent and therefore have no armed insurrection or any sort of resistance to the regime, etc. Turns out the relationship between democracy and conflict is not entirely clear. But that would be one. Inequality. Sure. Climate shock. So beyond economic growth, maybe climate shock to explain what would some of the channels be. Right. So some of that would go into economic growth, but maybe some of it will go into economic conditions other than growth per se. Maybe rural income is what matters rather than overall growth. We're going to come back to exactly that point in a few slides. Rebecca? So religious divisions, ethnic divisions, they're very prominent cases of sectarian rioting in South Asia or ethnic clashes in Kenya, etc. That we read about. Maybe those things matter a lot. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. The colonial history can matter. The history of conflict can matter. So it turns out in the data, and it's hard to fully interpret this, and maybe we'll come back to it again later, places that have had a lot of conflict in the last few decades are much more likely to have conflict going forward. Now you might say, well, is that because the history of conflict per se leaves all these grievances in place that leads to more conflict? Or is it that there's just some persistent local factor that tends to generate conflicts there? And the literature's been hard to disentangle those two explanations. Yeah. So what would be some of the geographic factors?
Just like, it's not often surrounded by some geographical barriers.
Yeah.
Other events from other countries would be difficult in their own problems.
Yeah, so it turns out actually in the data, one of the strongest predictors of civil war is a variable that's called ruggedness. So this is not the description of a person. It's the terrain, and basically there's actually just geographic measures of ruggedness which tell you how much variation there is basically in altitude. So countries that are very hilly with lots of variation in altitude, which is basically the definition of ruggedness, have much more civil war. That's one of the most robust predictors, and you might think that makes sense. If you're a guerrilla movement, you're an insurgency, it's great to go high up in the hills in remote areas where building roads is difficult, where it's expensive, maybe where there's snowfall in the winter, etc. So geography actually has strong predictive power. Okay, so there's a lot of things that could go into X. So given that, we've already come up with 5 or 10 of these in a short amount of time, and these may be hard to measure, and maybe we can't quantify them. How is this approach going to allow us to get at the causal impact of economic growth on war? You might think, for instance, let's go to ruggedness. Now, it turns out we have measures of that from satellite imaging. But let's say there were a geographic measure that we didn't have good data on, and like ruggedness, that led to more war, but could also affect economic growth. So for instance, in places that are very rugged, where it's difficult to build roads, transport costs are going to be high, trade is going to be difficult, you would think that would affect economic performance, for instance. You might also think that things like political institutions, or the type of democracy or autocracy that you have, don't just affect the likelihood of violence, they also affect the types of economic policies that are chosen, that could affect growth. So a lot of the variables we've talked about, if you don't have good measures of them, could lead to limited variable bias. And this is where instrumental variables is going to hopefully come in. Okay, clicker question. In your view, which of the following is likely to be the most important challenge in estimating the causal impact of economic growth on civil war? A, is it going to basically be data quality, measurement error in the income variables? If it's hard to measure income in poor countries. B, is it going to be endogeneity or reverse causality? In other words, is it going to be the risk that we find a correlation not because low growth leads to war, but because war leads to low growth, endogeneity? Is it going to be omitted variables at the country level, like the things we were just talking about? Or could it be multiple things, or do none of these sort of resonate with you? D. another 5 seconds. Okay, so most people actually go with endogeneity, reverse causality, although a bunch of you talk about omitted variables and other factors. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Let's go through the discussion and maybe come back to people's thinking about this. That has always been my intuition as to what the key issue is, and it's really motivated some of the work that we'll be talking about today. But the omitted variables issue is clearly potentially quite important. Yeah.
I have a question about
Yeah.
the data that we just saw.
Yeah. Yeah.
Geographical areas that are relatively blue, or like countries conflicting over like Palestine or Kashmir, where we don't know where exactly the country is relatively blue.
Yeah, so when there's sort of border disputes or contested territory, that counts as civil conflict here. So definitely Kashmir would count. And if you actually look at the years over the last say 50 years in which India say has had civil conflict, it's very high. Now it's limited to certain regions of the country. In recent years, actually, it's spread with the Naxalites to even more areas. But India is one of the countries that has the highest rate of proportions of years with civil conflict, in part because of Kashmir, for instance. Okay. So what are some econometric concerns in the regression I just showed you? We just talked about endogeneity. A very important concern when we see these correlations between war and growth are reverse causalities, as you guys basically all agree with. Countries that are growing slowly may be at more risk of war, but countries in war really have bad economic performance. That is a very strong empirical regularity in the data. If there's widespread fighting, you can't trade, doesn't make sense to invest, population is displaced, government services slow down or disappear, and on and on and on. And those are just the short run implications, let alone the long run psychosocial implications of victims of trauma, the destruction of property and capital, etc. So when we're looking at this correlation, endogeneity is just an incredibly central issue to think about. The second econometric, so just to illustrate this, let me illustrate with Sierra Leone, which is a country we're going to talk about more over the next couple of weeks in some of the papers coming up. You're going to recognize that blue plot on top, because I showed it to you in the first few weeks of class, which is GDP per capita in sub-Saharan Africa over the last 50 years. The green dashed line on the bottom is Sierra Leone. So first of all, Sierra Leone is poorer than the African average. It's one of the poorest countries in the world. It follows a similar pattern through the mid-'80s, but what you see is that actually the civil war took place during this period, from the early 90s to the early 2000s in Sierra Leone. While the rest of Africa was stagnating and having slowly declining growth during that period, GDP per capita in Sierra Leone plummeted, so it fell 40%. So that's just one war, but I can show you a similar plot for Mozambique during its war. We can go on to many countries and show you just how drastic the decline is in living standards during war. So this is a number, and we're talking about data, but just think about just the unfathomable human consequences of war. Beyond the numbers, there are 1 million people displaced, 50,000 killed in Sierra Leone, etc., and living standards really collapsed. So we can't ignore this channel. And then we were talking about omitted variables, and you guys really anticipated pretty much all this discussion about how the nature of government or political institutions or maybe social divisions could be driving both economic outcomes and war. So these are two central econometric issues. At this point in the course, I think you're all very familiar with these issues, so I'm not really going to dwell on them. So let's just talk about how a new approach can deal with these problems. So so far in the course, we talked about randomized experiments as a way to deal with these issues. We've talked about difference in differences, and the assumptions under which that yields valid inference, valid causal inference. We've talked about regression discontinuity designs. So instrumental variables are really the fourth major tool in your arsenal if you want to understand the impact of a certain policy or of a certain factor in understanding economic performance, say. It's also the most complicated. So we're going to have to get into this in a lot of detail. That's the reason why I'm talking about it in the latter half of the course, because you guys are totally ramped up from what we've discussed so far. Okay, so what is an instrumental variable, and how can it help us out? What we need to do with an instrumental variable is find something that affects, first of all, that affects economic growth rates. So we want to understand the effect of economic growth on violence. We have to find a variable, the instrumental variable, that affects economic growth rates. And then there's a bunch of other conditions. But that's the first order of business. And the paper on your reading list, this paper by Shumpert, Sutton, and Aaron Sargenti, shows that there's a climatic variable or a weather variable that actually very strongly predicts economic conditions and economic growth rates in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's rainfall patterns. So sub-Saharan Africa is overwhelmingly agrarian. When the rains fail, people's crops fail, as we talked about in the witch-killing case, and that affects a large share of the population. So we show that. And then the question is, can we take advantage of that to make progress? If we can show that, say, drought or bad rainfall affects income, can we then take it to the next step and link income to violence? And that's going to be the trickier part. That's what we're going to talk about today. So we focus on African countries in the 80s and 90s. We have 40-something countries, and we actually have to rely on satellite data to get at rainfall measures, and there are good reasons why. It turns out in sub-Saharan Africa, there are lots of rainfall gauges that have existed at some point in the last 50 or 60 years, but a lot of those rainfall series have not been collected continuously over time. So for instance, Somalia, with its civil war, hasn't been that great at publishing its internationally comparable meteorological statistics the last 20 years. And that's true for lots of other countries with political instability. Even in countries not in conflict, budget problems, limited staffing, etc., have meant weather gauges on the ground, rainfall gauges on the ground, are often unreliable. So there's actually another source of data. It's a global precipitation and climatology project, GPCP data, that combines estimates from ground stations and satellite data to come up with estimated local rainfall. So imagine the following. Imagine you have satellite data that tells you a whole bunch of different things. And what's going to matter the most for precipitation is going to be the density of cloud cover, what's called cold cloud cover. So in places when there's no cloud cover, it's not raining, right? When you have really dense cold cloud cover, you're much more likely to have precipitation. So they look at pixels of data, so finely grained, geographically located bits of data, where they have weather stations on the ground, and they compare them to the satellite readings in terms of cloud cover. And they get that correlation. They estimate that where they have data. But then there's large areas where they don't have good weather data on the